Find out how the CIA surgically turned a living cat into a Cold War spy and why the most expensive espionage project ever conceived failed on its very first mission.
Chapter 1. Zasada Paranoi.
The 1960s were not simply another decade in modern history. They were a stuffy, claustrophobic corridor in which humanity was forced to tiptoe, constantly listening for the echo of its own footsteps. The Cold War reached boiling point at this time, although on the surface, everything seemed frozen in a permanent stalemate. The Soviet Union and the United States, two geopolitical leviathans, watched each other through the barrels of thousands of nuclear warheads, and even the slightest miscalculation could lead to the immediate evaporation of entire continents. In this global game of chicken, where the survival of civilization was at stake, the most valuable currency was no longer gold or oil, but information. Knowledge of what the opponent was thinking before they even managed to formulate that thought became the holy grail for both sides of the Iron Curtain.
American public opinion fed on idealized images from television, absorbing John F. Kennedy's speeches about freedom and new frontiers, while in the dark, underground bowels of Washington, a completely different, brutal, and ruthless war was being waged. It was a world built of shadows, where trust was a luxury no one could afford, and paranoia became not just a state of mind, but a fundamental tool for survival. Newspapers daily screamed headlines about the Cuban crisis, about the building of the Berlin Wall, about successive spies exchanged on fog-shrouded bridges in divided Germany. This incessant pressure, this dull thud of impending apocalypse, permeated every wall and every institution, creating an atmosphere in which even the most absurd ideas began to appear as logical solutions.
It was precisely in this climate of absolute uncertainty and a desperate need for an advantage, in the very heart of the Central Intelligence Agency, that a new secret front was forming. The CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, hidden deep within concrete bunkers beneath the mean headquarters in Langley, was the place where traditional espionage work ended and the realm of science fiction mixed with brutal pragmatism began. It was here, far from the eyes of politicians and the public, that America's brightest minds, physicists, engineers, psychologists, and biologists, toiled, trying to outsmart the KGB using tools that to an ordinary person would seem like pure magic. The Directorate's corridors smelled of a specific mixture of ozone from overworked computing machines, the sour sweat of stressed analysts, and the biting smoke from endless cigarettes, which were lit one after another.
The atmosphere resembled a besieged fortress. Every scientist felt the cold breath of their Soviet counterparts on their neck, knowing that on the other side of the globe, in laboratories on the outskirts of Moscow, people like them were working day and night on technology designed to destroy the American way of life. The pressure for innovation was crushing. Traditional spies, recruited officers, secret collaborators, and double agents, all of this was slowly becoming insufficient. People were fallible. It was easy to break them during interrogations at the Lubyanka. They could betray under the influence of blackmail, money, or ideology. Worse still, physical infiltration into the most important decision-making centers of the Soviet Union was becoming a suicidal mission.
Traditional surveillance encountered an impenetrable wall. The Soviet Union, after years of intense counterintelligence operations, transformed its embassies, consulates, and key government buildings, with the Kremlin itself at the forefront, into veritable fortresses where every millimeter of space was monitored and meticulously checked. Soviet security services had mastered the art of detecting listening devices.
They possessed state-of-the-art equipment for electromagnetic radiation analysis, nonlinear junction detectors, and an army of technicians who could dismantle a building brick by brick in search of a hidden microphone. American devices of that era, though considered the pinnacle of engineering, still relied on vacuum tubes, the first clumsy transistors, and a tangle of copper cables. They were large, required powerful energy sources, emitted heat, and produced easily intercepted radio waves. Every attempt to install such a bug in the office of a high-ranking Soviet dignitary carried a colossal risk of exposure and the immediate outbreak of an international scandal, which, in an era of nuclear tension, could have been a spark thrown onto a powder keg. It was for this reason that one of the most somber meetings in the history of the Directorate of Science and Technology was taking place. The spacious yet claustrophobic due to the lack of windows briefing room in the Langley basement was shrouded in gloom. The only bright light came from a heavy industrial projector, which with a rhythmic, hypnotic click cast successive slides onto a white screen depicting American listening devices intercepted by the Soviets. Around a massive oak table sat a dozen men in rumpled suits. They were department directors, chief engineers, and veterans of special operations. The air in the room was so thick with tobacco smoke that it seemed to have a physical, viscous consistency. The men silently watched the screen, which displayed brutal evidence of their technological failure. The latest directional microphone prototype shattered into pieces, which the KGB had found in its London embassy just 2 days after its daring installation. The faces of those gathered, illuminated only by the screen's reflected glow, were gray with sleeplessness and contorted into grimaces of anger and helplessness. This was not merely a matter of lost equipment worth millions of dollars. It was a slap in the face to their intellectual pride. The chief analyst, a man named Thorne, whose face resembled a mask carved from granite, stood up and heavily rested his hands on the tabletop. His voice, dry and devoid of emotion, cut through the silence in the room, stating the brutal truth. They were losing the technological war because they were trying to combat Soviet paranoia with their own engineering, which was doomed to fail from the start.
Thorne explained with ruthless logic that every piece of metal, every battery, and every antenna is an anomaly in the natural office environment. The adversary isn't looking for information. The adversary is looking for deviations from the norm. As long as the CIA produces devices that look and behave like devices, the Soviets will find and neutralize them. Metal detectors will always detect metal. Frequency scanners will always pick up radio transmissions. At this dead end of espionage evolution, they needed something that completely eluded traditional categorization. They needed an agent who would be invisible to machines, who would not emit an artificial signal, and who could enter the most important Soviet offices without arousing the slightest suspicion and even inspiring sympathy.
A deep, overwhelming silence fell in the room. The brainstorming session that followed Thorne's words was a testament to the growing desperation. Impossible, absurd things bordering on madness were proposed. Someone suggested training cockroaches, someone else miniaturizing equipment to the size of a grain of sand, which with the technology of the time was a pipe dream. Every idea was immediately torpedoed by engineers as unfeasible or by operational officers as too risky. The atmosphere thickened and frustration reached its zenith. It was then that one of the younger operational officers, a man who had returned just a few weeks earlier from an exhausting observational mission in one of the grim, smog-shrouded capitals of Eastern Europe, timidly asked for the floor. His name was Miller. His eyes, still bearing traces of permanent fatigue from sleepless nights spent in cold vans, shone with a strange, almost fanatical light.
Miller did not start with charts or equations. He started by telling a story which seemingly had nothing to do with grand geopolitics. He recounted his observation of the Soviet embassy complex, which resembled a besieged fortress surrounded by a high wall with barbed wire, patrolled by grim guards with weapons ready to fire. Miller spent days in a dilapidated apartment across the street, observing through the powerful lens of a scope how every person approaching the gate was mercilessly searched, identified, and scrutinized with a gaze full of suspicion. No one and nothing could penetrate this security cordon without triggering an alarm. And yet, as Miller observed with growing fascination, there was one gigantic, almost unbelievable breach in this iron system, a loophole so mundane that it was invisible to the paranoid minds of KGB officers. This breach was an ordinary stray cat.
The animal, with the nonchalance typical of its species, ignored the rules of Cold War geopolitics. Miller described in the minutest detail how this scrawny, gray, stray cat approached the main gate. It had no pass, no diplomatic immunity, no alibi. Instead, it gracefully squeezed between the wrought iron bars of the gate without triggering the slightest reaction from the alarms or motion sensors, which were calibrated for human dimensions. The guards, those same people who just moments before had brutally searched diplomats, suddenly changed their demeanor at the sight of the animal. Something akin to human feelings appeared in their eyes. Instead of reaching for a weapon, one of the Soviet soldiers crouched down, pulled sandwich remnants from his pocket, and threw them at the cat's feet, quietly whistling to it. The cat graciously accepted the offering, after which, with a slow, majestic stride, it moved deeper into the complex, disappearing into the doors of the administrative building, to which only the highest intelligence officers had access. This moment, this brief event observed by the frozen agent, became a turning point. A powerful short circuit occurred in Miller's head, and from the chaos of thoughts, a concept of astonishing simplicity and incredible potential emerged. The cat was not perceived as a threat. The animal was completely transparent to security systems based on detecting hostile human intentions. The human brain evolved in such a way as to ignore the presence of common animals in the environment. They were part of the background, like furniture or potted plants. No one would suspect a cat of espionage. No one would check its fur for listening devices while petting it. The cat could go under the desk where Soviet generals discussed plans for ballistic missile deployment. It could sit on the windowsill in the cipher room. It could move freely through the corridors where a human agent would be immediately shot.
It was an idea so radical, so divergent from all previous doctrines, that at first, after Miller finished his story in the smoky room, an absolute deafening silence fell. One could only hear the rhythmic thudding of the projector mechanism and someone's accelerated breathing. The senior directors looked at Miller as if he were a madman, someone whose operational stress had finally destroyed his nervous system. There were quiet snorts of suppressed laughter. Someone tapped their forehead. Finally, one of the chief engineers, a man with a red face and an authoritarian tone, slammed his fist on the table, calling the idea the stupidest thing he had heard in his decades-long career. He asked sarcastically if the CIA would next start recruiting pigeons and squirrels, and how they imagined interrogating such an agent if caught. It seemed the concept would be immediately buried under an avalanche of bureaucratic ridicule and forgotten as an anecdote about the pernicious influence of paranoia on human reason.
However, Miller had no intention of giving up. With a passion worthy of a preacher, he began to defend his vision, systematically dismantling his opponent's arguments. He explained that in an era of an endless technological arms race, where the Soviets would always be one step ahead in detecting conventional devices, the only chance was asymmetry. They had to use a tool that the enemy couldn't even define as a weapon. Biology offered the ideal solution. A cat was a predator with excellent senses, incredible agility, and a natural ability to move silently.
Its anatomical structure allowed for the exploration of tight spaces, and its domesticated nature meant it wasn't afraid to be in the immediate vicinity of humans. Miller argued that it was enough to combine this biological marvel of engineering with the latest miniaturized technology they were currently working on to create an ideal, undetectable hybrid, an agent who hears everything, sees everything, and whom no one would ever suspect of working for the United States government.
It wasn't about attaching a large microphone to a collar, which would be blatant amateurism. It was about deep, surgical integration of equipment with the animal's body, creating a cybernetic organism, a cyborg, at a time when that word was associated exclusively with comic books. As Miller developed his argument, suddenly supported by several more risk-tolerant scientists, the atmosphere in the room began to noticeably change. The laughter died down, replaced by cold, analytical calculation. Director Thorne, who had been silent until now, resting his chin on his clasped hands, suddenly looked up. In his eyes there was a flash of understanding. He understood that in an age when people are sent into space and rockets can destroy the world in 30 minutes, traditional rules of logic ceased to apply. Madness had become the new norm. Thorne perceived the genius hidden in the absurdity.
If the idea seemed preposterous to the CIA elite, it would certainly be unimaginable to KGB officers. Their own institutionalized paranoia, focused on searching for double walls and radio waves, created a gigantic blind spot in their field of vision. A cat, a common moggy seeking warmth and food, fit into this blind spot perfectly. Thorne slowly nodded his head, and this single economical gesture was like the pronouncement of a verdict approving the birth of one of the strangest projects in the history of intelligence agencies. It was decided to establish a special top-secret unit whose task was to bring this vision to fruition. With each passing day, the vision became increasingly terrifyingly real. In sterile, brightly lit laboratories far from downtown Washington, veterinarians, neurosurgeons, and acoustics experts pored over plans that resembled the notes of a mad scientist from the Victorian era.
The project, codenamed Acoustic Kitty, involved invasive medical procedures. Operations were envisioned during which miniaturized microphones capable of picking up a whisper from a dozen meters away would be implanted into the ear canals of a living animal. Thin, almost invisible transmission wires were to be precisely threaded under the skin along the cat's spine and neck, fusing with connective tissue to avoid detection during an accidental petting. The transmitting antenna, flexible and resistant to mechanical damage, was to be intricately woven into the long tail, allowing the animal to unconsciously direct the signal through natural body movements, raising and lowering it depending on its emotions. The batteries powering this complex system were to be small enough to fit into the abdominal cavity, where the cat's body heat would further warm them, increasing their lifespan in Moscow's cold climate. This was engineering on the edge of bioethics, a step towards manipulating nature in the name of national interest. The Cold War ultimately removed all inhibitions from people, justifying actions that would have been considered barbaric in peacetime. An invisible moral boundary was crossed. The paranoia of principle became a fait accompli in the pursuit of absolute enemy surveillance. The creators of the Acoustic Kitty project did not hesitate to attempt to play the role of creator, modifying a living creature to serve as a helpless tool in a global conflict. The atmosphere in the laboratories, a strange combination of surgical sterility and the wild, unpredictable nature of the feline test subjects, was tangible proof of how far the madness of those days had gone. Scientists, absorbed by technical challenges, gradually dehumanized the animals, treating them solely as vehicles for microprocessors and receivers. No one questioned the purpose anymore. The only question was whether the system worked. Thus, a legend was born, a painful and grotesque monument to ingenuity born of fear, a project that would forever be etched in the darkest, most closely guarded files of the Central Intelligence Agency as ultimate proof that in the world of secret services, no idea is too absurd if it promises an advantage over the